Hi, so the 77-day conspiracy, except it's not a conspiracy, of course. Some time ago, in fact, several weeks ago, someone on Reddit noted that there were 77 days between each patch in Legion. And this is leading people to say, oh, so now we know when the next patch is going to be. And it's fair enough because we've had several patches now in Legion. The big thing with Legion has always been there's going to be regular content. So in a way, we shouldn't actually be surprised that there's been an exact interval of time between each patch, because you can imagine it from Blizzard's point of view. WoD was such a disaster, and you could imagine that World of Warcraft has sort of run, obviously I don't know how it runs exactly internally, but you can imagine there's been a situation where they've thought to themselves in the past, okay, the expansion is sort of intended to last this length of time. 22 months was quite common for a number of expansions. And we want to get, this many tiers of content in it built around the raids, because that's always been the premier content. But you can imagine developers not being given strict deadlines. It's like, we need to get it out in this window. But, Blizzard, I would say one big strength that they've had in the past has always been they'll release something when it's ready, right? People say, oh, when is it coming out? When it's ready. But then in Warlords of Draenor, it all fell down because, in actual fact, it just wasn't coming out. They eventually abandoned it just to throw themselves into Legion. So you can imagine a situation where someone has gone, okay, we need to be a bit stricter about this. We're going to have these periods of time. You're going to work to this deadline. And you're not going to necessarily, it's some people's job to think about the whole expansion. But these teams, it's your job. This is the content we're going to do for the next patch. You've got this amount of time to do it. Easier to focus then. It draws a parallel really with my teaching. When I'm planning, like I'm doing at the moment, planning out my lessons for next year, I don't plan all my lessons like scripts for a film or a TV series. What I do is, because I can't say for any particular lesson, okay, they're all going to get to this point. Because what if they don't? I can't just forge on ahead when people aren't understanding something. So I might need to take a bit longer over it, but then catch up later on. So I work along units, set periods of time. It's right, we need to get through this amount of stuff in this amount of time. If we need to spend a little bit more time on one thing, that's okay. I'll have to make it up later on. But you still have that deadline at the end of the year. So it shouldn't be any surprise that Blizzard have said they've chosen an 11-week cycle, and they've said to their development teams, look, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. However, it's a good job that it's sort of come to the fore now, because, of course, people are now looking at this and going, so it's going to release this patch at the end of August, the 29th of August, I guess, if you're in North American realms, always a day later for European realms. However, it could well be that if someone had have pointed this out in another, say, 8 weeks' time, that the pattern wouldn't be there anymore. There are very, very strong suggestions coming out that 7.3 will be coming out very soon. Not the 29th of August, much sooner than that. So then, and of course we don't know this, Blizzard haven't announced it officially, but I'm not basing this on portents and signs and, oh, I looked out of my window this morning and saw a crow beating up a squirrel. There are very definite suggestions coming from the direction of Blizzard HQ that 7.3 is ready to go very soon. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that when it comes out that, that means that the raid itself, because the raid doesn't come out with 7.3, remember, that'll be 7.3.5. It doesn't mean to say that the raid is going to come out a lot sooner and we don't have that much time for Tomb of Sargeras itself, because I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. So then you have to think to yourself, why are they wanting to bring 7.3? Because I'm totally agreeing with this fella, this Das Momo, who is an Alliance rogue, looking at his icons, who posted this on Reddit like a month ago, really. It absolutely makes sense that they would want to do this 11-week thing. It's also quite good. It would be quite good if Blizzard could even openly just say, do you know what? There's going to be patches on these dates throughout the year. We are going to stick to that schedule, because that helps players plan around it as well. So obviously some players like myself, raiders, particularly if you're an officer in a guild, the start of a tier is an intense period of time. So if you have more than the usual week or two's notice about when it's coming, that's fantastic. That would be really great. Obviously, they don't want to do that. I suppose it's the same thing with me when doing my channel. I plan to do various things. There's certain things I'd planned to have done by now, but you know what? They're not ready, so they're not going out there. And Blizzard probably have the same thing. They probably want the safety net of, if we need to give it another week, we're going to give it another week. But so if 7.3 does come out a little bit earlier than the 11-week interval, and as I say, I am getting to the point where people are convincing me increasingly that this is going to be the case, then you have to think to yourself, why is it? What do Blizzard want to get out 7.3 so quickly for? What's coming in 7.3? Well, I'm going to be doing a series of videos over the next week, short videos on the different aspects of it. But ultimately, the key content that's coming with it, in terms of what affects us in the here and now, in terms of the power of our character, is the Netherlight Crucible. This is going to make us more powerful. Now, it could be argued with Tomb of Sargeras that there's obviously been, they've had a bit of stick over Tomb of Sargeras, particularly on Mythic mode, overtuned bosses, all the rest of it. They've already nerfed a number of bosses quite a bit. They've buffed bosses as well. Mistress Assassine actually was made more difficult, but that in a fair enough way. But that's a separate issue. One thing that's always been good at nerfing raid content in the past has just been the passage of time. You get better gear. But these days, you don't just every week get better gear from your raids as such, because there's other ways to get it. As Exorcists themselves pointed out, when they defeated Mythic Avatar, which dropped 730, behave yourself, 930 item level gear, they already had an average of 930 item level. In other words, they already had the item level equal to the gear that drops. That has not been the case in past expansions. So Blizzard are looking at it now and they're thinking to themselves, right, we're going to need some more bosses for the other ones. They've already nerfed Kill Jaden and Avatar for the guilds. It's unfair to call them lesser guilds because they're still very impressive guilds, but not quite up to Method and Exorcist's abilities and, you know, commitments and planning and all the rest of it that goes into it. But then for us mere mortals, they're going to have to nerf it even more, because even when we get to it with sort of, in theory, better gear, that's still not going to be enough. What happens with these patches is they keep making us more powerful. So 7.2, for example, they brought us the extra artifact traits. That straight up made us much more powerful immediately without any extra gear, because those traits just made us better. The Netherlight Crucible does a similar thing. It's basically a talent tree on our talent tree. You know, it puts talents on our relics this time and makes us more powerful, straight up more powerful. Are Blizzard trying to push 7.3 ahead because, one, there's not a lot of things to go, as long as they get the bug fixes sorted, there's not actually a lot coming out with it. There are new zones and quests, of course, and people are very excited about this if you're like a lore nerd, like many of us are. There's a new dungeon coming out. Obviously, they need to make sure that's tuned correctly because of the Mythic Plus system. And there's the Netherlight Crucible, and then you've got the invasion, stuff like that. There's not actually a lot with it, really. So it's a lot of stuff that could be brought out quite quickly. Are they just doing it because they want us to just become suddenly more powerful, to ease us through the rest of the Tomb of Sargeras raid, without having to just keep nerfing bosses each week, because then it just becomes farcical if it hasn't already. But anyway, those are my thoughts on it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching. My WoW Flash is going to be on a little bit later tonight, where I just talk about the general news anyway, and then I'll be streaming a little bit later on tonight as well. So until then, I'll see you later.